Thank you, Arta. I love you, Arta. We've been friends and beyond that, really brother and sister in terms of doing all kind of work, doing work within the faith. We've worked together and in a larger society. And Arta shows up. It's not lip service, it's not lip service. He shows up and all the way up and is willing to go to the mat, which he has done for me personally, for my family, and for others. And to me, that is the truth. And the reason why that becomes important is because there is love here. It's not cerebral, it's not intellectual. It's not by virtue of, oh my goodness, we're both Baha'is, therefore. It is because he's truly my brother, and I believe that. And that's different than being an ally, by the way, but I won't go down that lane. I'm not gonna go down that lane. But I wanted to speak to, and I have a number of quotations that I'm going to identify, but what comes to mind immediately? I grew up in the AME church. That would be African Methodist Episcopal. That's the church I grew up in. And there's a reason why it's African Methodist Episcopal, because we couldn't be with the rest of the Methodists. Okay, we couldn't be with the white Methodists. We had to create our own branch, even in the worship of God. And this is a long-standing problem we have here. Long-standing, goes all the way back, if anybody has their Bible, to Numbers 12. And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. And it goes on to say that the anger of the Lord was kindled against them. And behold, Miriam became leprous, white as snow. So let's just unpack this for a moment. God got mad at Miriam and Aaron because they didn't like Moses's black wife. So much so that he smite her with leprosy. And however you look at that, however you see it, whether it's symbolic or literal or whatever your interpretation, Black people would say God don't like ugly. Okay, at the end of the day, God don't like ugly. And I guess that's apparently true. But we didn't hear it then, and we don't hear it now. And very rarely do I hear people talk about, our connections as people. I look at folks, I'm saying actually Jewish people, we might be related. But the bottom line is there's certain things that we're willing to move into. There's certain things that we're willing to address and others that we are not. But it is not that we have not been called to do this work spiritually. We have all been called to do this work. This is not obscure. It's not something we don't know. It's something we've avoided, or at least thought we could. And so what shows up now for me, what I love about working with Arta is a scientist. He's a true, incredible mind. And you combine that incredible mind, scientific mind, with that spiritual base, and it is light upon light. So anyone today will tell you that race is a biological fiction, which it is. We are, as human beings, 99.99% the same. And instead of us leaning into that reality in terms of our intrinsic oneness, let me tell you what people say. Oh, well, since race isn't a biological fiction, let's not talk about it. Okay. Any means, like the House of Justice has said, to literally go in the other direction we do. So I've had people say to me, well, Joy, race isn't even real. Maybe the answer is here, we just don't need to talk about race. And then I have to get real clear. I said, you're absolutely right. Race is a biological fiction, but racism and white supremacy are not. So not only do we have to talk about it, lean into it, we've got to do what Arta has said, is take an action to do something different. So I'm not about going back to normal. And I'm going to illustrate that very clearly, why going back to normal is not even normal. Okay, so I want to speak to some of these ideas and beliefs that folks have, and I'm going to share my screen because I jump all over the place, and it would just be cruel to have someone else have to deal with it. It just would be plain cruel. So I want to go to this slide, and I often actually use this slide to open up most of my presentations, and it is only recent that I was, I've come upon it because I just read Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson. I love her work, love her as a person, and highly recommend that folks read the book, as well as The Warmth of Other Suns, which was the first book that I was basically came into acquaintance with her work. We in the developed world are like homeowners who inherited a house on a piece of land that is beautiful on the outside, but whose soil is unstable loam and rock, heaving and contracting over generations, cracks patched, but the deeper ruptures waved away for decades, centuries even. Many people may rightly say, I had nothing to do with how this all started. I have nothing to do with the sins of the past. My ancestors never attacked indigenous people, never owned slaves. And yes, not one of us was here when this house was built. Our immediate ancestors may have had nothing to do with it, but here we are, the current occupants of a property with stress cracks and bowed walls and fissures built into the foundation. We are the heirs to whatever is right or wrong with it. We did not erect the uneven pillars or joists, but they are ours to deal with now. And any further deterioration is in fact on our hands. Unaddressed, the ruptures and diagonal cracks will not fix themselves. The toxins will not go away, but rather will spread, leach, and mutate as they already have. When people live in an old house, they come to adjust to the idiosyncrasies and outright dangers skulking in an old structure. They put buckets under a wet ceiling, prop up groaning floors, learn to step over that rotting wood tread in the staircase. The awkward becomes acceptable, and the unacceptable becomes merely inconvenient. Live with it long enough, and the unthinkable becomes normal. Exposed over the generations, we learn to believe that the incomprehensible is a way that life is supposed to be. So when we think about this, I'm so grateful for Isabel articulating that in that way. I'm appreciative that we don't have to engage in a discussion about whether we should be having the discussion. Okay, I think that so often, and I was on actually a Zoom prior to this, and people are moving forward. And as Baha'is, we don't have a choice. I hear people talk about a lot of stuff about, love one another. But again, what Arta said is we do have a mandate. And we have been told the repercussion of not dealing with that mandate, that blood will run through the streets of American cities, as they already are doing, if we do not lean in fully to this mandate. And so when I look at this, I look at it differently than some people, because some people think they have an option because it hasn't reached their manicured lawns yet. But what we're talking about here is a situation that if we don't get a hold of it, there won't be an America. There will not be America. And in fact, I've said to people over and over again that we're creating the perfect storm for America's enemies. They know exactly what match to light. They know, and we've given it to them, because there are people so full of vitriol and hatred, so full of the false narrative that Arta spoke of, that they're willing to burn this country to the ground before they share it with people, that look like me. And so I think that this notion of anti-Blackness is not new. And certainly living in this skin, it is not new. And so, Martin Luther King, there are a lot of speeches people give and talk about, but, he said he wrote a whole book on why we can't wait. The time is indeed now. And we're told as Baha'is, let deeds, not words, be your adorning. He whose words exceed his deeds, know verily his death is better than his life. So giving lip service to what we say we believe is a great thing. In fact, taking down statues, changing the names of sports organizations, all good, getting rid of Aunt Jemima. But at the end of the day, those are symbolic gestures, you see. So when we say back to normal, let's just be clear about it. Let's do the deep dive. Back to normal doesn't mean the same thing for people that look like me than say, Arta. Back to normal is back to marginalization, disproportionality, police use of deadly force. Are you following me? That's what back to normal is. And there are plenty of people that say, can you know, they got Black Lives Matter signs. They pin safety pins on, they say they're allies. But at the end of the day, I'm not getting ready to share my power, my position, my supremacy with you. At the end of the day, I want to keep my stuff. I want to keep my privilege. So it's really good that we have conversations. And some people are just now having those conversations. But you see this house we're in? If we do not repair this house, there will be no house for any of us. But we have to really be appreciative of what repair means. Because some things, well, like I said, you can shore them up, clean them up. Some things, well, you say, well, you don't have to get rid of the whole thing. Let's just replace this part. And sometimes you got to tear down the house, and even the foundation upon which it is standing is cracked. We've got to make that call in our lives about how we're going to do that and what that looks like. And I want to really speak to this whole notion of oneness. I mean, we know that we are one. There is an illusion that we have that we are separate. In fact, Einstein said that. We suffer a delusion of disconnect when all things in the universe are connected. We can get metaphysical. We can get real deep with that. But down here on the ground, I, as a human being, and every other human being, has a right, born with the right to be treated with respect and dignity, born with an intrinsic worth of nobility. All of us were born with it, but we chew away at it. We chew away at it. So let me get back to my PowerPoint, and let's move forward to normal. I want to warn you that there are a couple of these pictures, because what I did when Arta and I spoke about this, and when we were first asked a while back, you know, this word normal, by the way, is going to be the new N word in the future. That's just an idea I have there. A friend of mine talked about it. So back to normal is back to this. This is 2020. This is a protester. Muzzles are for dogs and slaves. I am a free human being. Now let's just unpack this for a moment. This is 2020. This is someone that's really protesting the use of a mask, but the manner in which this is being done is to suggest a level of dehumanization. But this isn't during slavery, you see. This isn't during Jim Crow. This isn't during redlining or urban renewal or, well, gentrification times. This is really right now. But still, in the comparisons, I have a humanity and you do not. Then and now. Then and now, and I want you to unpack this picture really well, because often when I share this picture in my presentations, it's alarming. But I want you to look closely at that picture on the left. And there's something wrong, aside from the fact that you have taken a man's life. What's disturbing are the people in the picture. Because you see, I want you to consider, just right now, wherever you are in your space, looking out of your window. And when you look out of your window, you see a little puppy rolling around. And the little puppy is running up to people and licking their legs. And someone decides to wrap a rope around that puppy's neck and hang it up in the tree in front of you as you watch it choke, gasp, and die. Probably all of us looking would need a little, mental health assistance after that. We might be traumatized, might be triggered, any number of things. And in fact, whoever that person is more likely to go to jail immediately if it's a puppy than if it's a man. And I don't say that hyperbolically. I want you to look at this picture, and I want you to know what's concerning about this picture to me. Well, they're all in white, so this is an occasion. Likely they've been to church. Again, what I want you to appreciate is, while there's no way in the world Christ would support such a thing, Christianity most certainly did. On a lot of fronts, the church supported slavery, and in so doing, terrorism and violence. And so when we look at this picture, what I'm concerned about largely, because people ask me, it's really okay to look at Black people and say, gosh, they've been harmed by, 339 years of slavery, followed by Jim Crow, lynchings. Yeah. We would imagine it's not hard. It's not even plausible that we could escape all that without some injury. But what happened to white people? And what you're looking at is what happened to white people. They don't feel an ounce of empathy. He is probably less than human to them. He's less than the empathy they would show to a deer. And look at how tiny they are, how small it gets indoctrinated. So when we start talking about it, we always think about things as a past, but then we have George Floyd. George Floyd was publicly lynched. And it took experts on every side to go, yep, it was the knee on the neck that killed him. Yep. No, he would have probably been walking around okay. No, it wasn't his heart condition or the fact that he had drugs in his system or whatever. No. It was the knee on the neck. But it took experts, even though the entire world watched it, because, well, it was a Black man. And at this point, we're looking at the future of a white man. And as it was stated by Chief Justice Taney, the Black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. This goes back to our Constitution. Then and now, well, slavery was a bad thing. And there's some mythology that slavery ended and suddenly the playing field was leveled. But we all know, based on even what Arta said, that when slavery ended, it was followed by, well, more trauma, in fact. And I'm going to do some math on that. So to your left, you're seeing what is called convict leasing. So convict leasing. So on the left, you see all of these folks that are lined up, that are working, because you see, America has always lived on a slave labor force, and they needed one. So after slavery became officially illegal, you couldn't do it anymore. They said, well, can we lease them? Well, let's see now, in order for this to perpetuate our wealth and our supremacy, we've got to figure out a way how we can use these Black people to build our wealth and get everybody to sign on. So we give them another name. We say they're convicts. Oh, they're dangerous and they're violent. So they deserve what we're doing to them first. And we want them to be, to be working, to be doing something meaningful. So we're going to have them work. But let's unpack this. So convict leasing, in order for you to lease them, they have to be jailed. And everybody wants to know where overrepresentation in the criminal justice system came from. Well, you're looking at it. Big business then, and to your right, big business now. And what this was about was, they said, well, now what did they do? We have to arrest them for things. What did they get arrested for? Vagrancy, 15 years. Startling a white woman, 20 years. Looking menacingly at a white woman. Any of those things could cost you, well, even a worse and more intense and violent life than slavery. But aren't you, well, I don't know, haven't these things changed? Isn't slavery over? Then and now, Emmett Till. Emmett Till, now let's unpack this one for a moment, because I always have to do then and now, because there's some, I don't know, there's a kind of a historical blindness, a lack of any historical memory. And that's Tamir Rice, by the way, he was 12. So you have Emmett on the left, who was accused of whistling at a white woman saying, hey, baby, to her. And they beat him so severely that his face was not recognizable. I did not put that picture in here, but his mother had an open casket funeral to share with the world what was done to her boy. Now, later on, the woman, the perpetrator, the one who lied, admitted it. Recently, I think it was 2018, she wrote a book. Said, oh yeah, it was all a lie. She waited carefully to make certain that her husband and his brother, or whoever, that they were already dead. So she began to basically confess. Yeah, I lied about that, caused the death of this child. And in addition to that, the family that, of course, everyone Black always knew, and that no one was going to be, prosecuted for it, especially not back in the 50s. So the family has set up really beautiful signs at the base of the river where he had been killed, where his body was thrown. And it cannot stay up more than 30 days without, well, white people, contemporary white people, shooting up the sign, even though they know that the woman lied, confessed it. The anger, the vitriol continues. Then and now. So it was little hands often that needed to do that picking of the cotton. Sometimes it was little hands. And each time those little hands reached in, you see their thorns, if you've ever seen picking cotton, that would be razor sharp, that would cut their little fingers, but that didn't matter. But we have progress, right? We got some progress because we have over here, that's Ruby Bridges, where you had to have, escorts to get her into the actual school and classroom, protection for she and her family. Yeah, there was some progress. You're not in the fields anymore after all. But down at the bottom here, this is a classroom 2021. A classroom that was captured. This is a preschool. These are the little bitty ones. These are the 3-4-year-olds, And they're in a school, 2021, in Georgia. And, they have cameras so parents can look in and see what your kids learning. What are they doing? And these Black parents decided to look in to see what their kids were doing. And when they looked, they noticed that not one Black child, not one, has a plate of food in front of them. And all of the white kids do. So now let me explain something in terms of human development. Because I teach human development. I taught it for 20 years, actually, birth to death. Those two groups of very innocent children are learning something. You see, this is why we can't go back to normal, because that is normal. The only thing we don't know is what they did when the camera wasn't on. But we do want to know why Johnny can't read. But I want to unpack this fully so you know that I'm not being philosophical here. Based on human development, both sets of children are learning. The white children are learning something. One is that they're special. We're special because we get our food either first. We really don't even know if the Black kids ever got the food. Well, we do know they certainly got it after the white kids got it. And the white kids learn, well, I'm special. And I'm at least more special than them. But what's happening to the Black children who could not even articulate what happened to their parents? They didn't tell their parents that this was going on. They were trying to navigate this cognitively in their little heads and hearts as to why they weren't getting the food. And this is what little children do. They don't tell mommy because we must be bad. I'm not going to tell mommy because there's something wrong with us. And then there's shame. And then there's fear. And then we wonder why Johnny can't read. So let me unpack that a little further for you so you understand how deep this was, because this was a bit unsettling for me for a lot of reasons. But I actually was recently on a dissertation committee. This was like just last week, dissertation committee. And the woman in her 50s, she's finishing her PhD. She's doing work in the community, working with youth who have been traumatized. Hence, I am one of those professors or outside people to weigh in. So, during a dissertation, the chair has the right to the first question after the dissertation has been presented. And then I was the next person to ask a question. Now, here's the thing you've got to know. I'm going to give her a question that's going to make her shine. That's my goal. Okay, I just want to tell her, say a question. So I say, based on my understanding of development, social emotional development in children, I ask her, I know you work with middle school, high school students. I'm wondering, looking at this photo, and I showed her the picture that I showed you, right, of the kids in the same little picture. And I said, tell me, in terms of social emotional development, what is the impact of such a thing that has occurred with these children as it relates to their future growth when they get to you in middle school and high school? That was my point. And I knew she knew about social emotional development. I knew she could do it, but she burst into tears, something I could not anticipate. I was like, this wasn't the goal. The goal was for you to shine. What have I done? And she gathered herself and she said, I'm sorry, but that triggered something. Now, I'm going to say she's in her early 50s, maybe mid 50s. She looks good because, Black don't crack. But the bottom line was, this is a woman in her 50s. Who's been triggered by a picture I showed her 2021. She goes, I remember being in preschool and I was the only Black child. She starts telling a story. Now, this has nothing to do with the dissertation, but she tells that story because it was important for her healing. Because you see, that's what going back to normal means. But anyway, she starts telling the story about how there was this cabinet and it was really high. And at the top of the cabinet were those little, white, thick underwear for like training pants. Because you see, the teacher knew that kids make, they have their little mishaps and their mistakes and they'll wet themselves. And so she has these nice, soft, clean underwear to give them if they should wet themselves, except for her. Because when she wet herself, the teacher wouldn't give her the little underwear. She would make her sit in it all day. And so she started trying to figure out. Now, remember, we're talking about 3 to 4 years old. Now, we saw the little kid in the field and we know what happened back then. We understand what Ruby Bridges went through. But now she's talking about her preschool experience. And so she took her underwear off. That was her answer to herself, trying to navigate the hostility at 3 years old. So she took her underwear off. That way you don't have to sit in the wet. This is smart from her vantage point. And it all was going well until, she was going up the stairs and her little skirt, a little dress went up and the teacher sees her and she becomes absolutely angry, yells and screams at her, further humiliating and harming her, embedding the shame that she produced in her, called her parents. Parents couldn't understand it. And she had not the skills to even articulate it, trying to outthink an adult that was trying to harm her. I said, okay. She got herself together, got back on track. It was good. I really need to process that with her, but she was okay. She said it just triggered that memory. So I called my mentor because we're getting ready to do a training. So I'm calling my mentor, who is, by the way, 90 years old. That would be Dr. Edwin Nichols. And I called him right after this had happened because I said, Dr. Nichols, let me explain to you what just happened to me. And I tell him the story and the dissertation and the whole thing, the picture. He says, that triggers a memory for me. Now, he's a clinical industrial psychologist. He didn't break down in tears, but it did make him remember. He says, I was 5. Now, I want you to understand, this is a 90-year-old man that's remembering 5. I went to kindergarten. He says, and when I was in kindergarten, my teacher was telling the story of little black Sambo, little African black Sambo. And she was drilling it home. And he, if you know Dr. Nichols, he's an extraordinary human being, as was his parents. So his mother had taken him to the Museum of Natural History like the day or two before. And they were teaching them about, all the different animals in Africa and the animals. And he knew that tigers weren't in Africa. So he says to his teacher at 5 years old, he couldn't be an African because there are no tigers in Africa. Tigers are in India. This is what he tells his teacher. 90, go all the way back to the year that we're talking, 5-year-old. And the teacher flushed red, was very angry. Of course, called his mother, insisted upon a meeting. And when his mother showed up, she goes, he was insolent, he was disrespectful, he was, all of these things. He was inappropriate, he was, and she goes, but was he right? And of course, now the teacher flushes red again. Okay. But what I'm trying to unpack for you is when we say back to normal, we need to truly understand the implications of that, because I don't want to go back there. I have no desire to go back there, because back there isn't, it's not even really back anywhere. We want to go back to the status quo where we squeeze people in the middle to take care of the poor and to keep the wealthy wealthy. We marginalize those who have been marginalized. We have police use of deadly force. We see that. And every single day that we're doing this, somebody's folding back civil rights. Somebody's changing the rules of voting as we speak. So back to normal. It's back to oppression and anti-Blackness and terrorism. That's what back to normal is. And again, there are no bones about it. We are very clear that pre-COVID, there are people right now, they call it victim perpetuated suicide. that don't even see. They have a sense of futurelessness. And it's my role as an elder, as a Baha'i, that really understands the intrinsic oneness and nobility of all human beings. It is my responsibility to instill hope. It is my responsibility to do more than the lip service, but to show up. Because I don't want to go back to where we've been. Because that means that people that look like me suffer. So I want to end with something. Two things, which I thought was fascinating. One was, a lot of work has been done around implicit bias, right? First of all, let me just be very clear. I don't want to try to train people out of this behavior. I'm not interested in sitting down with the preschool teacher and trying to train it out of her. I'm interested in her not being put in front of our children, period. That's what I'm about. Go figure it out and learn. Matter of fact, you can continue to teach maybe little white children, but not little Black children, not indigenous children, not Latinx children. I don't care how well you feel about you or your lack of awareness of your bias, because I have to lean in on the most significant person, and that is the most vulnerable, and that is those children, all of them. And maybe, Miss Ann, you aren't supposed to be in front of children. I'm just saying. I digress, but I feel very strongly about that. Not trying to train it out. You've had a couple hundred years to train it out. Okay, so what we have learned actually how to really diminish this sense of bias and racism and vitriol. And part of it, believe it or not, has to do with proximity. But let's look at it. They did work on something called the implicit bias test, right? And then there's the one that looks at the weapons test, right? And they were working with police officers. So this is recent. They did research on how do we stop these people from killing Black folks, and why are Black white cops killing Black men? That's the whole article. And these are a whole bunch of scientists, Arta type people, that go in and look at all this stuff and measure it and all that. Great. And what happens is they take these police officers, and the way the test goes is they show you something like a soda can, or a wallet or a gun. That because you're trying to see if you can differentiate a wallet from a gun. But before they show you those things, for a fraction of a second, they show you a Black or white face. And therefore, they see what you connect with each. And of course, police, unfortunately, like the rest of the population, were faster to shoot unarmed Black people than unarmed white people. They would often mistake, the weapons. All of that stuff would happen. And then they took and they put them in a situation. I'm going to use these words because in the article, I don't think anybody looked at it, but it stunned me. They're reading a story in which the white person has been saved or protected by a Black person from another white person. And then they say they are induced to believe or to feel. They are induced to feel. And that always got me, that they're made to feel like this Black person was someone that cared for them, that protected them, that saved them. And in one sitting, they were able to reduce bias in police, the most important folks to reduce it in, 48%, because they were made to feel. Stay with me. They were made to feel, because you see, part of the polarization, Baha'is have always known, we've been struggling with this for a long time. We've been dealing with this a long time, and we've had to show up for a lot of spaces that weren't pleasant or comfortable. But when they say they are made to feel, you have to understand what that's saying to you, that you're seeing my humanity. You're made to feel maybe like I'm as human as you are. But you see, as long as we can keep the divide, the polarization, they're bad, they're dirty, they're violent, they're criminal. And guess what? They don't even feel pain like you do. All of that is believed in 2021. But when you are made to feel, it means that you're made to be still. And Christ said, be still and know that I am God. Turn thy sight into thyself that thou mayest find me standing within thee, mighty, powerful, and self-subsisting. If we are willing to be present with each other, you see. And I mean, virtual reality has even a higher level of the reduction of bias. Virtual reality. That means I'm going to be with you, but not be with you. Whatever you got to do, but if you're just with me, so Arta and I aren't friends because we share intellectual ideologies. I've been in his house. I've held his children and his wife. He's walked through the world with me, not philosophically. Now, Arta is an extraordinary person, as are no doubt, obviously Faith and, clearly Yusha. But the bottom line is when we are present with each other, those things dissipated or disappear from us. So it's a matter, the answer lies in understanding our humanity. In the Baha'i writings, they say that the Black man is like the pupil of the eye. Everybody's got one, and it's all the same color. The Black man is like the pupil of the eye, surrounded by a sea of white. But it's the pupil that contains the sight. It beholds what is before it. Who do you want at the helm? And who never gets to be at the helm? The people with the vision. Because you see, we're long-suffering people, and we're amazing, miraculous people, in my opinion. But I want to end with one of my favorite quotes. Night has succeeded day, and day has succeeded night. And the hours and moments of your lives have come and gone. And yet none of you hath for one instant consented to detach himself from that which perisheth. Bestir yourselves that the brief moments that are still yours may not be dissipated and lost. Even as the swiftness of lightning, your days shall pass, and your bodies shall be laid to rest beneath a canopy of dust. What can ye then achieve? How can ye atone for your past failure? Let's not go back to normal. Thank you so much.